Good morning, everyone. My name is Addisu Lashitew. The paper, it's a draft paper, I'll be presenting is about business models. So just as a forewarning, it doesn't have a lot about frugal innovation. I hope that by definition the product I'm dealing with, cooking stalls, is to some extent inclusive. Frugal or not depends on probably the kind of store we're talking about. So it's less content is there, but I'll be talking about the business model. The outline of my presentation will be, first I talk about the problem of using solid biomass for cooking in developing countries, and the solution, in this case, about cooking stoves. Next to that, I talk about the challenge, the adoption challenge of cooking stoves in Africa specifically. Next to that, I talk about how business models, the hypothesis here is that new novel business models can be used to facilitate the adoption of clean cooking stoves. I will look at the potential contribution of cooking stoves here. I provide some preliminary results. These results are built on two businesses that try to produce and distribute cooking stoves in Africa. So it's somehow kind of detailed case study of two cases. I'll wind up with the conclusion. The problem, it's a big problem. You can see it on the map. You might call the light map of the world. As much as 40% of humanity doesn't have access to electricity, and this is even higher in Africa. If you look at the share in the world, the part of Africa and South Asia are much more significantly affected. In Africa, 60%. Around 60% of the people don't have access to electricity. This leads to the use of solid biomass for cooking. Basically, people collect firewood and use it in an open fire for cooking, and that leads to a lot of problems. The first thing is that economically it's costing a lot of money. Some say around 25% of the income of people is spent on buying charcoal and firewood, especially in urban areas. And for women and children, the smoke that's coming out of the use of raw biomass can also have a health effect. But also in terms of time, it consumes a lot of time to cook, to collect the firewood, and this affects women especially. Environmentally, it's not environmental friendly because it leads to significant deforestation and carbon dioxide emissions in Africa. But more importantly, the health effect is actually a widely recognized problem. Around 4.3 million people die out of the problem. So it's a huge problem. It's one of the most important contributors to the disease burden in the world. Acute respiratory infections, some problems with the lung, including lung cancer, but also eye diseases such as cataract come from this. It's not apparent immediately. It comes from the accumulation of experience, exposure over a long period of time. So this map is just a flip of the first map. In the first map, we saw that electricity access is very limited in Africa and South Asia, and you can see that these are exactly the regions which have a large percentage of the population consuming solid biomass for cooking purposes. The solution I'll be talking about here will be about clean cooking stoves. There's a growing recognition that this can be an important part of the solution. GACC, the Global Alliance for Clean Cooking Stoves, it's a huge organization involving thousands of business and other agencies. It's run by the United Nations Foundation, and they aspire to, by 2020, introduce around 100 million cooking stoves in Africa. So it's a big problem, and it's a big part of cooking stoves. Clean cooking stoves are a big part of the solution. The business I consider work with gas-fired, what's called gas-fired cooking stoves. These are specific types of the main types of cooking stoves that are used. One is that is shown here. This is a type sold by one of the businesses I studied. Basically, what it does is it takes solid biomass, just like open fire cooking. It takes biomass. You put firewood on top of it, could be charcoal or something else, and then it uses extreme heat to gasify the biomass. So it leads to near total combustion, which means that there's practically no emissions. So it's almost clean cooking, almost comparable to cooking with gas. Of course, it depends on the kind of biomass you use and some other conditions, but it's very clean. And it's also efficient by as much as 5 times, 80% fuel consumption reduction means you use 5 times less. But also, again, it depends on the conditions, the kind of fuel you use, but still one way or another is very efficient. Ideally, you should be using a more processed kind of input, so some pellets, that's how you pronounce it, or briquettes, other kinds of more processed inputs. So the stove is much more efficient when you use this. It's not carbonized, meaning that it still have a lot of smoke, but it's much more structured, it's compressed, so it can be more efficiently burned. The products cost between $50 and $150. So you would say, well, for middle income households, at least they are affordable and they solve a big part of the problem, but the adoption rate is very low. It's estimated that around 50,000 such stoves have been sold worldwide up to today. So that would be the problem we'll be talking about. So there are multiple layered combination of adoption barriers that are making the more widespread use of efficient clean cooking stoves a problem. At the micro level, we can talk about, for example, cognitive barriers, because people are used to cooking with open fire in rural areas. They have been doing it for decades, and if you come up with a new product, it means you have to change your mind. It's not easy to just switch easily. It needs some familiarization as well. Economically, the purchasing power, I say $100, for example, for the product I just showed, that's out of reach for many people. So that's another barrier. In addition to that, consumers, also depending on the kind of the consume their cooking habits, they need kind of different kinds of stoves. So what's useful in one context might not work. There are very different kinds of examples for this. In some places they eat bread, in other places they eat rice. So the stove needs to be very flexible to the kind of cooking habits that the households use. At the industry level, technology is an important barrier from the literature, meaning that the right combination, the product with the right features, that's also affordable. Producing such products is difficult. Also, the value chains are often incomplete, meaning that you have a good cooking stove, but probably there are no suppliers of pellets. So, and one without the other doesn't probably work, or it's very inefficient. And it's considered a risky business also because many of the people are scattered throughout the country, in the countryside. At the macro level, policy support is a problem. For example, when I interviewed one of the business, he told me that if they want to sell it to Ethiopia, for example, the import duty is very high, so they would probably have to double their price because it's a taxable one. But also institutional problems, financing is a problem, meaning that the banks do not easily facilitate import for the product, infrastructure, transportation, and a number of problems can be. So just a bit about the two cases I look into here. The first one is called, well, the names are artificial names for the sake of confidentiality. So the first one I call CES. They started in 2011 in an small African country. They started in a partnership with a large multinational company. The partnership failed, and so they became independent in 2013, 2 years later. So the commercial operation is run in Europe, in a European country, but they have a plant in a small African country. So they produce, assemble the cooking stoves, and they try to export it to different countries from there. So it's more like an FDI model. The second one is started in 2012, a year later. They are much smaller scale. Also, their business model is a bit different. They, what you might call the razor blade business model. They don't focus on selling the stoves, but they have a plant producing the pellets, and they try to make the revenue from the payers. So the idea is that you distribute stoves sometimes with a discount, even subsidizing the prices, and eventually you provide sustainable supply of fuel, and from that you try to make some money. This business operates in only one country, so they don't export anything. So this business started with the water source sequential program. They have a 5-stage program where they slowly, gradually try to build their business. So it's a much more incremental and locally developed business model. What I'm trying to do is complete these business models. So from the literature, it's one way of defining business models is structure and governance of the transactions involved in creating value. Another way of defining it is the core logic of creating and capturing value. But I will just some ideas of how new business models can contribute to solving solution barriers. For example, low affordability is a big problem. And so new kinds of businesses can try to tackle through a combination of different strategies. For example, frugal innovations, we have been talking a lot about it yesterday, but also frugal innovation alone might not be enough, so sometimes we might have to arrange microfinance arrangements so that $100 is not a lot of money, but still the poor might do much better if they could pay it in small installments, so microfinance can come in there. The scale can also be another option. Small margins but high volume strategy can be one way of addressing this issue. Cross-subsidizing across customers, carbon credit schemes, because like I said, these stocks are much more efficient, so there are mechanisms in which you can sell the carbon savings. Local conditions, you can address differences in preferences by working closely, co-designing, co-producing with local people. That would necessitate location in a specific country or place where you want to sell. So the idea here is that new kinds of ways of doing business, new kinds of structuring business, especially with the help of technology, can address some of the barriers of adoption. So I use one framework from the literature. This is a framework used by Yunus and his collaborators. It's the famous Mohammed Yunus. He has a paper on long-range planning. They use this framework. It's not a new framework. It's a standard one. But the idea is that if you want to capture the way an organization does business, you can use 3 frameworks. So the first thing is the value proposition or the value design. What do you produce? What do you offer? What's unique about it? To whom do you target it? The second one is value constellation, or you might call it value creation. What kind of networks do you use? Value chains within the organization, but also outside. The resources, the activities, the key resources and activities that are needed to create value. The second component, the third one is the profit creation, or some call it capturing value. So you create value to your customers, but in order to be sustainable, also you should be able to capture some part of that value, so your revenues should exceed the cost. So what are the conditions that make sure that you have actually excess profit, positive profits? We modify this framework a bit because we're talking about sustainability here and social impact also. So we borrow another concept from the literature, sharing value. So if you want to become a triple bottom line business, it shouldn't be just a financial bottom line captured here, but also there should be a case for social impact and environmental impact as well. So we also include this component as a fourth component of the business model. We try to use this framework to map the business models of the 2 cases. This first one is CES, Clean Energy Solutions. In summary, you would call it a traditional FDI model. So they have a clean cooking stove. It's relatively high tech. It comes with a number of gadgets. It has a solar panel that can be used for harvesting energy, that can be used for charging mobile batteries, very important in rural areas, but also it can be used for lighting. But the price is a bit high, as much as $150, so the target customers are literally higher income people, or better to say middle income people. So that's the value proposition, and their value creation mechanism is basically centralized production. So they have a plant, a single plant, and a small country, so that cuts down costs because it's a low-wage country. So they have low operation costs. And they distribute with their own mechanisms, with their own centers sometimes, but often also through third-party agents. Value capture, the profit equation, in other words, is, like I said, low production cost, but also by necessity it's a high distribution cost because they're located in one country and they have to export it, pay import duties and things like that. So to compensate for these high costs, they have to charge higher prices. The value mechanism is low production cost, high distribution cost, and to compensate for that they charge higher prices. The mechanism of sharing value in this business is the product itself, cooking stoves. Like I said, there's a lot of embedded features that make it socially and environmentally friendly. So that's one mechanism in which they share value, but also they have around 14, 15 employees in the factory in Africa, so it provides an income for those people. So this will be the framework, the business model of this organization. The second one, the razor plastic blade model. Their value proposition is not the stove itself, but rather the combination of the stove and the fuel that they provide. So they have a stove, but they don't stop there. They promise to come back with the pellets, and you have to buy them every week or every month. They are located locally, so they provide follow-up services, maintenance. Sometimes they change the stove when they have a problem. So that's their value proposition. The way they create value, it's the stoves come from abroad, so they don't produce them. But it's a sequential business model, so slowly they consider installing a plant as well. They rely on local presence. They produce the pellets. They distribute some to retail shops. One thing they do is crowdsourcing. So, 1 minute. Okay. They do crowdsourcing, meaning that they collect firewood from rural people, and then they process that, make it into a pellet, and they sell it back for the same people at a much discount or at no price sometimes. The way they capture value is through low production costs from the pellets, because they crowdsource the firewood, and they also have some carbon credit schemes, meaning that they distribute. They sell the carbon saving coming from the sale of the stoves. The way they share value, the product itself is socially and environmentally friendly, but also they involve rural people by distributing the stoves at a discount. Sometimes they say for free as well. So if I compare the two cases, we find two ways of doing business. The first one is that one way would be embedded, what I call the second case, which is called ENM. They're embedded, they're locally present. The other way would be the multinational, the partner of the multinational starts by a plant and an arm's length distribution. So they have their own strengths and weaknesses. If you want to be embedded, some call it in the literature native capabilities. So it provides you better understanding of the local market, the local resources. It builds trust. So if you want to change mindset, convince people to buy your stoves, you have much better access, but also a greater confidence to be used. As a strength, but the problem is that these things cannot be transferred to another location. So whenever you want to start a new market, whenever you enter into a new market, you have to invest again. So then transferability problem. Somehow related concept is that interactive versus standalone. This is the one from my last slide. So interactive, Yanani again, the embedded business. It's not just embedded, but also it tries to build the local ecosystem. An example would be here, for example, they work with financial institutions in the locality to make possible mobile payments. So they develop the ecosystem. The idea here is that when there are no supporting institutions, the lead firm itself can take charge of developing the ecosystem. So it's supposed to be a substitute. Again, the problem here is that it's costly to do that, and again, it's also not transferable. So I think my main message is that there are many ways of doing the same thing, and of course, I hypothesize that those different approaches can lead to different outcomes. Two businesses are very young, so it's not possible to say if the two ways of doing business can lead to different outcomes as yet. But conceptually, it's possible to reflect that some ways of being embedded can have an advantage of gaining trust and changing mindsets. Of course, more data is needed to validate that. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, then I'll first start with Eva, with some short comments.
No, that'll be short. Thanks. I thought it was a very clear and concise presentation, and that with your focus on the business model, you actually have quite a unique selling point. But maybe after yesterday, I wanted to ask you, because in your introduction you started by stressing the independence of the business model almost within like the innovation chain. Would you still hold to that, or would you say that the business model is related to technology and like a broader context, or would you ascribe the agency to lead to the adoption of new technologies completely to the business model? That was kind of the first question. And then the second question also relates to a few things that we heard yesterday, because you argued that this more bottom-up approach of the second case of local production and distribution will maybe lead to higher stove adoption rates and ultimately, hopefully, more inclusivity. I did some limited research on cook stoves in Zambia, and actually there's more or less the exact two business models, and I didn't find a lot of difference between these two business models in adoption rates. I also think the first one is more like a wholesale concept, and then the second one, in fact, the first one might actually provide the stoves for the second case. In your case, it's not what's happening, but I know of one company who produces the stoves wholesale, but then once they reach the users, there's still this local distribution network and the local production of pellets. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. But then also yesterday with context variation by design, it was suggested that you need flexible design, and that this local adaptation isn't always suitable. So I would just challenge you to think about whether you think your findings are generalizable or they just apply to these specific cases.
What do you mean local adaptation is not suitable?
No, that local adaptation can be expensive and sometimes cumbersome and take a long period of time, so that you should strive to create more, not necessarily standardized, but solutions for different contexts that you can then maybe locally tweak, but that are a bit more standardized in essence and design.
Yeah, so let me begin with the easier one, second question. Yeah, it's possible that the first business, which actually manufactures assemblies stoves, also supplies them for the second business, which focuses on distributing. I will see the problem from a research angle. It's actually, it can be an advantage because then you have the same kind of product in both cases. It's comparable. And if you wanna compare if an arm's length approach, producing in one location and sending it away, which has its own strengths, you're able to increase the scale because of production in one location. You don't have to incur more costs of distribution to of course, but you don't have to deal on a day-to-day basis with the local distribution, so that saves costs. if you want to make these two comparisons, I think it helps a bit to have the same kind of product. You'll be dealing with different types of products, then it can be a problem.
Can I just ask, if it's the way that you're saying, then those two different business models have different aims, because the one just aims to produce and send to different localities, and the other aims to really sell in local markets. So I think that's two different things, whether you're both producing or...
Two different ways of doing the same thing. Well, I mean, I have to say, the first plant sells its Rotterdam. Well, maybe in one country you use an agent like the one, it's kind of selling the one. So you can compare the performance in the other 50 plants in Africa with its performance with the performance of the local firm here. So in a way, yes, they're doing different things, but the overlap is much greater than the similarity in that sense. Coming to the first one is the business model. Business model. The way I understand it, is it only factor relevant for adoption? Is that your question?
If you would still claim that it's the most important factor in the innovation value chain.
Yeah, but I mean, the interesting thing about the business model is that I'd say there's a value proportion and then the value creation and the capital. It's a bigger concept, a broader concept. So you have the innovation process there also, not the process as such, but the outcomes. The innovation is there. So it's a little bit more informative, more holistic than taking a look at the product alone, which can, if the business model is different, the way the product is sold is different, then you cannot really make much point. So in a sense, I think it's a little bigger than the product alone. It includes the product as the process of producing plus the marketing approach. But the limitation might be here is that we don't look at process. The business model is just a framework. You don't look at a dynamic, which is how innovation happens and so on. So, finally, design and local adaptation. This is a little bit too much refined. I don't have much evidence to say really much. I can understand that in many situations, the cooking habits can be very different, so you might have to adapt a lot, and that might lead to a lot of costs. But in the framework I have, in the data I collected, there's no way I can compare. That cost is really large enough to be.
Thank you. Ja, dus mijn Pieter, JC, Wouter, Saladin.
Okay, I found it very interesting. One of your earlier slides, you gave the components of the business model, so the technology, the scale, the way you finance it. And I wonder, shouldn't you take that as kind of point of departure for the analysis of the specific cases to see which combination of components of business models is ideal to get a frugal innovation to the target group that you want to reach? And then you could check for these two examples whether one scores better than the other in terms of inclusiveness, in terms of number of people reached. So I think the elements are there, but I would use them slightly different.
Shall we come up with a few questions? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yes,
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think another time we will talk longer with you, maybe about now, because we're working with 5-6 companies in the field on designing new gasifier stuff like African Clean Energy, Gaia Power, since today also Mimamoto. But I'm wondering, a lot of people are talking about business models about cleaner cooking stoves. Gasifiers are totally different than all the other cleaner cooking stoves. So are you looking at that as well? Because there's a totally different kind of value proposition behind there. So you talk here about your conclusion about cleaner cooking stoves in general, but in your examples you have been looking more at gasified cooking stoves. Do you see any difference in there? And maybe a more general question. People are talking really fast about numbers, but the value proposition is very important. And did you look also more in depth, what's really the value proposition for the end user for the gasifier at the moment? That's not about deforestation, it's not health or other, but a lot of other things. What are, according to you, the value propositions?
Yeah,
I think that comes from the
building
same
on
product.
that
Yeah.
question, maybe making it more specific. If you talk about team cooking gasifier projects to, let's say, donors, Western institutions, the aspects like deforestation and health are emphasized. One of the things we found in several projects is that those are not at all the drivers for people to become interested in clean cooking stoves and gasifiers. We have anecdotes, but because we don't have time, I won't share it for now. But what have you found explicitly, especially from the, let's say, end user side, that they consider to be valuable? There was the value proposition, and generically it seemed to be logical, but we found that there are actually differences between what we think and what is sort of logical from an institutional point of view, that the values are considered to be, and what actually end users that have to buy the stoves consider to be valuable. We're sort of building on Jason's.
Maybe you first ask these questions and then Sarah will do it.
Yes.
Or do you want to do you have a follow-up to this one?
I have a follow-up on this one.
So you do follow-up. Other question. They are very good
Yeah, just to make this whole idea about value proposition a bit more specific, I think you really could benefit here from a gender perspective, because I hear us talking about people, but I think in fact it's women who cook, it's women who collect the firewood, etc. So I think here, who is actually buying the cook stove, or who makes the considerations and the decisions to buy the cook stove? And is that the same people that actually use it? So there might be a lot of other considerations where you refer to convincing the mindset as a very crucial thing. Then it almost sounds like people need to be convinced, or that they are not knowing, and if you tell them how it's, if you give them more knowledge, then they know, and then they will adopt. But I think it would be interesting to really unpack what kind of considerations or motivations are there to either use it or not use it, or etc. And I think this is really about unpacking again this household or this concept of people. And I think that in that sense the business model could be gendered, or it could also, I don't know, maybe reinforce gender stereotypes, etc. So if you say, well, I think your colleague Samuel Abdelmour, who is also in Rotterdam, he wrote a beautiful article about that, how cook stoves in, I think it was South Sudan, how it reproduced. I think if you could engage with that literature, it could really, unpack it a little bit more.
Yes.
First give you the chance to
Yes.
answer this question.
So the first and the last comments were, I would say, very different ways of doing the same thing. You mentioned, I think, if I come to your point, you mentioned that I could take a few areas as, in which new business models can contribute to adoption, can contribute to adoption as a point of departure, and then delve into that. I assume on theoretical grounds, or conceptual grounds, that's what you mean, right? It's possible to do that, except for two things. One, I mean, as far as I know, the literature is not really, especially in the business model, it's not that much specific to allow to do that kind of conceptualization. It's possible to venture into that. The other problem is that, okay, I can't conceptualize, but going into the relevance of those issues in the practicality of adoption, that needs data, and the data is, for the two cases I consider, it's too early to say if one way of doing business leads to better outcomes than another. So instead of two limitations, but it's a good point. Anyway, I can be more sharper, specifically in what way specific business models and features can lead to better adoption behavior. And you mentioned a very different way, looking at the adoption behavior. That's another way of doing that. Maybe I'll do that because, well, when I started the case studies, two case studies, I thought I could learn a lot by looking at the businesses themselves, but the outcome is not there. So in that sense, I cannot say much. But they are also experimenting, they're changing, they try one thing today and another thing tomorrow. There's no definitive answer, so maybe another way would be looking at the behavior of the people who makes the decision and what kind of criteria are involved, power relations as well. So that's another way. I mean, if I want to complete this paper, that's a possible direction. You asked about the product features that are relevant.
No, not so much product features, but
yes,
have you observed differences in the drivers of...
The drivers are not the ones we talk about often. I think it's in the framework. I don't take the social and environmental benefits as a value proposition. I mean, how the environment benefits probably is a little too far for people to decide on a day-to-day basis whether or not to buy stuff. So that's a social impact. That's why I have for them other than the value proposition. But again, the literature says there are a number of things that are important for their decisions. Which one is more important, specifically the gas-fired stoves? I don't know. I didn't collect data. I didn't do empirical work, but I feel that could be a possible next extension. Why gas-fired stoves? Because the two cases I picked happen to be distributing and producing them. It could be different for other kinds of stoves. I mean, the gas-fired ones are a little bit on the high end, I believe in terms of price range, but also technology use. So, do you have any idea why that should be different?
Well, there will be totally different, because it's a totally different way of cooking indeed. It's a totally different way of price. It will be a totally different way of maintenance. It will be a totally different, it's a really radical change of cooking for the people. It might be also totally different, like the value chain of the pellets who have to be delivered, etc. So to generalize it to cooking stoves, I think is rather dangerous, because clean cooking stoves can be also kind of improved wood stoves, where you just put in wood in a normal way with a better air ventilation. So I think the gasifier is a totally distinct kind of group in the cooking stoves, cleaner cooking stoves. So you have to be careful to generalize it from the gasifiers to the cleaner cooking stove, and the other way around, things from the cleaner cooking stoves to the gasifier world.
But also, in terms of impact, it is the most efficient, it's the most healthy also in terms of in terms of release of air particles. So that's why I think it's interesting. But again, maybe contrasting across different stoves, that's a very possible thing.
And I really would advise you to, did you use some of those stoves yourself?
Did I use?
Yeah.
I saw one, I didn't.
I really would advise you to start using some of them to understand really what you're talking about, because it's nice to talk about a business model, but you cannot talk about it as long as you have not been using it, practicing it yourself to see really what is a gasifier stove and to understand how is the life of the people and how they interact with it. Because then you can start to think like what is much more going around there, because the business model is not just buying the thing, it's part of a bigger business around the household, and there are a lot of considerations in there, and I think that especially as a postdoc you have the chance to do so, but I think you should do so.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So otherwise it still looks like a Unilever sending a product to one side of the world or to the other side of the world and we make a business model around it and it will happen. Well, the interesting thing is it will not happen like that. So that's why this kind of context is so interesting.
That's a very useful point. I tried to buy one, but they didn't have it like it.
We have 4 or 5 to come around.
Yeah, sometimes one short question I would give it to Serendip with Peter the next time.
What can I say?
Thanks. One suggestion that I have is, when you are going for the household survey of questioning, if you could take, the groups which have migrated from rural areas to urban places, because in urban places it seems to be logical to many to use something other than those the traditional techniques. So what really prompts them to change their behavior in the urban setting for the same group of households? A second is built on what others have said, especially what Saskia has also mentioned, that you have to really see the way the women choose a particular technique. And there is a study, by the way, cooking stoves have been a very popular research agenda, and it has been attempted in many places and failed in many places. And so probably you can do a literature survey to know about the reasons for failures, and that can give you a good idea. But one such reason was mentioned by Amulya Reddy, and the book is available on the net, is that many of them live in thatched roofed houses, and this thatched, they attract termites, and this smoke, which is not so healthy for people, they actually help kill those termites. And so people were not willing to change to smokeless stoves, even though they were helpful for individuals, but they wanted to kill the termite as well. So if you have seen such cases or such reasons.
Yes, I think the urban-rural dynamics is it's an important thing. I also think many of these technologies, especially the gas fires, are meant actually for urban areas in terms of income, but also you basically need electricity. You need a battery to charge the fans, to charge the battery to run the fans, which makes it more efficient. So they're basically made for urban areas, but how they're applicable in rural areas, that's an interesting question. Household behavior, I did a literature survey, and extensive literature on adoption barriers. I didn't dwell on that here because I was looking at it from the business angle. But again, that's not possible evaluation. I can try to find out exactly what features are more relevant in this context.
Okay, thank you very much. What is actually an important part of many frugal innovations, we are talking about cooking stoves especially, is taking a substantial part in the discussion. So it's nice that we have a presentation about it as well in this workshop. I would like to invite Ariane to come present about quite a different topic, frugal innovation in education. And